Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Israel and the Hamas terrorist group agree on a ceasefire. This comes one day after President Biden urged the Israeli Prime Minister to seek de-escalation. Iran says world powers agreed in principle to lift sanctions against the country's oil sector, while U.S. Senate Republicans call on Biden to continue the sanctions. The House passes a $1.9 billion bill to enhance security around the Capitol, but many are unhappy with it. Progressives say it doesn't do enough, and Republicans are concerned that it could militarize the Capitol. 5 rural counties in Oregon vote to leave the state and join their conservative neighbor Idaho. The president of the movement says they just want to preserve their traditional values, while Oregon cities are becoming increasingly progressive. And Pennsylvania joins a handful of states limiting their governor's emergency powers. Israel and the Hamas terrorist group agreed to a ceasefire at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday. Egypt mediated the negotiation. But explosions are still being heard in Gaza, and sirens for incoming rockets are heard in Israel. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Israel's Security Cabinet voted unanimously in favor of a mutual and unconditional truce proposed by Egypt. Israel says that Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists have fired over 4,000 rockets towards Israel, but many of the rockets fall short, landing in Gaza. Most recently, Hamas rockets fired at Israel landed on its own power lines, cutting off power for hundreds of thousands of Gazans. The electricity in Gaza is controlled by an Israeli company, Israel Electric Corporation, or IEC. Today, the workers' union of the IEC announced that it will not fix the electric lines to the Gaza Strip that were damaged during the latest round of fighting until the Israelis being held by terrorist groups there are released. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in the summer of 2014 in a war with Hamas, and their bodies are believed to be held by Hamas in Palestine. NTD had an exclusive interview with the chairman of the IEC Workers Committee to find out if the families of the fallen soldiers pressured him to make the decision.
They did not ask us to take this step. It is a step that comes from the bottom of our hearts. It comes from our employees as a sign of support and solidarity and mutual responsibility, and out of a desire to really see the boys at home. We have the support from all of society in our decision. I am not under any pressure right now.
Gaza remains under a partial blackout. Since the fighting began on May 10th, health officials in Gaza say 232 Palestinians have been killed and more than 1,900 wounded. On the Israeli side, authorities reported 12 dead, and hundreds have been treated for injuries in rocket attacks. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Following the ceasefire in Israel, President Biden gave a short speech on the situation in the Middle East. He says he spoke to Israel's Prime Minister.
I extend my sincere gratitude to President al-Sisi and the senior Egyptian officials who played such a critical role in this diplomacy. I also appreciate the contributions of other parties in the region who have been engaged in working toward the end of hostilities. These hostilities have resulted in the tragic deaths of so many civilians, including children. And I send my sincere condolences to all the families, Israeli and Palestinian, who have lost loved ones, and my hope for a full recovery for the wounded. The United States committed to working with the United Nations, and we remain committed to working with the United Nations and other international stakeholders to provide rapid humanitarian assistance and to marshal international support for the people of Gaza and the Gaza reconstruction efforts. We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Authority, in a manner that does not permit Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal. I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy.
Iran says it's optimistic it can reach a nuclear deal with Britain, France, Germany, China, and Russia. The U.S. joined the discussion indirectly. But top Senate Republicans voiced concern that lifting sanctions against Iran would undermine U.S. national security.
Iran's president said Thursday countries involved in nuclear deal negotiations agreed in principle to lift major sanctions. Those sanctions affect Iran's oil, banking, shipping, and insurance sectors. Iranian Fars news agency reports that Iran's top nuclear negotiator said Wednesday key issues are yet to be decided. President Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, citing violations by Iran. Trump called it a horrible one-sided deal, saying it's defective at its core. He then imposed sanctions on the regime. Meanwhile, President Biden is pledging to return to the deal. Iran and several world powers began official talks on reviving the agreement in April. The U.S. and Iran had indirect talks in Vienna.
We remain engaged as a party in these discussions. Obviously, our discussions, as you know from following this, are through indirect talks through the Europeans. We continue to believe that our efforts as it relates to bringing an end or preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon need to happen through diplomatic channels.
4 top U.S. Senate Republicans in April called on President Biden not to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal and instead continue sanctions against Iran. They're concerned the deal would damage U.S. national security interests.
Today on Capitol Hill, the House passed a nearly $2 billion funding bill to enhance Capitol security. It barely passed with just a single yes vote dividing the yeas and nays at 213 to 212 votes. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more from Washington, D.C.
This Capitol security bill did pass along party lines, but 3 Democrats did join Republicans in opposing it. Republicans say they aren't opposed to more security around the Capitol, but they're concerned that they don't know where exactly to spend this money yet, since investigations into where security is lacking is still ongoing. Some Republicans also say they're afraid this could permanently militarize Capitol Hill.
Permanent security changes buried in this nearly $2 billion supplemental bill. Some of these permanent changes are within my committee's jurisdiction, and my committee hasn't held any hearings to review or examine these changes. He's referring to the $200 million dedicated to station the National Guard around the Capitol. Also included in the $1.9 billion bill are reimbursements for the cost of responding to the attack, building repairs, security-related upgrades, and body cameras required for all Capitol police officers. Most Democrats were eager to pass it.
We cannot wait in order to be able to effectuate security of this Capitol for all who work here and all who visit here.
Republicans agree on additional security measures, but say the House Majority Leader jumped the gun by bringing the bill to the floor before a bipartisan deal was met.
Support for the Capitol Police must be provided. But we do not need to make premature decisions before the ongoing security assessments are complete to commit funding that goes well beyond the scope of January 6th or authorize programs without any debate.
Joining Republicans with the no vote, 3 progressive Democrats, Representatives Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, and Ayanna Pressley, had different reasons. They say the bill doesn't address underlying threats of white supremacy and disinformation. They also say the bill is premature, but blamed this on Republicans for blocking a January 6th commission. The commission bill did pass the House Wednesday, but both bills likely won't pass the Senate. Even top Democrat Senator Patrick Leahy hasn't endorsed the spending amount for this new security bill. The National Guard is still stationed around Capitol Hill right now, just for a few more days until May 23rd, but they could be back in the future, staged around the Capitol as a quick reaction force. That is, if Senate Leader Chuck Schumer can convince at least 10 Republicans to vote for this bill without making any changes first. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
President Biden signed legislation today to address anti-Asian hate crimes. It directs the Department of Justice to expedite the review of pandemic-related hate crimes and also raises awareness. NTD's Lynn Lin has more.
President Biden signed the anti-Asian hate crimes bill on Thursday. In his speech, Biden gave an emotional reaction.
Every time we let hate flourish, we make a lie of who we are as a nation. I mean it literally.
The bill would create a new position at the Justice Department to expedite review of pandemic-related hate crimes. It will also establish an online reporting system and raise public awareness. The House passed the bill earlier this week in a 364-62 vote, and the Senate gave its overwhelming support with a 94-1 vote last month. Republican lawmakers who voted against the bill were concerned that the broad definition of hate crime will turn the government into the speech police.
But of course, the bill doesn't specify what an incident is. No definition at all. This means essentially that we are asking state governments to act as speech police and creates a precedent that could extend to any manner of things someone may deem offensive.
The last piece of hate crime legislation was signed by former President Barack Obama in 2009. It expanded the law to include crimes motivated by sexual orientation, gender identity, and more. Lin Lin, NTD News.
3 U.S. senators criticized the Department of Energy's decision to revoke a Trump-era order. They say importing critical equipment from countries like China would pose a risk to American residents.
In the wake of the cyber attack against Colonial Pipeline, 3 U.S. lawmakers are raising alarm over protecting the U.S. critical infrastructure from such attacks. Senate Republicans Kevin Cramer, Ted Cruz, and Tom Cotton sent a letter to the Department of Energy on Wednesday. They opposed the DOE's decision to revoke a Trump-era order that banned importing certain electric equipment from China. The DOE revoked the order on April 20th. In the letter, the senators wrote, DOE has a significant responsibility to protect the U.S. electric grid and help ensure that critical equipment supplied from foreign adversaries does not pose a risk to the national security of the citizens of the United States. While President Biden's CIA director recently acknowledged that China is a formidable authoritarian adversary, your agency's action does not appear to treat them as one. They said revoking this order is not consistent with President Biden's 100-day plan to address cybersecurity risks to the U.S. electric system. They requested the DOE to explain why it was necessary to revoke the order.
A group of Republican lawmakers honored the Cuban people at an event outside of the U.S. Capitol. They also sought to remind people of the effect communism has had on the island. NTD's Steve Lance brings us more from Capitol Hill.
Republican members of Congress gathered today to honor Cuban Independence Day, the day Cuba claimed its independence from Spain over 100 years ago in 1902. But rather than being a celebration of Cuban independence, it served as a reminder of how quickly communism can take hold of a country and take those freedoms away.
This should be a happy occasion. Sadly, today is a somber reminder that Cuba is not a free country.
Cuba wasn't always a communist country, but it slowly evolved into one. The Communist Party of Cuba was formed in the 1920s and adopted various names such as the Popular Socialist Party until the Cuban Communist Revolution solidified its hold on the country in 1965. Florida Representative Mario Diaz-Balart reminded attendees of President Reagan's words that freedom is always only a generation away from extinction.
I'm reminded from people that talk about socialism as this panacea. And then I'm also told that in the United States it can never happen. But I'm reminded of people in the wonderful country of Venezuela just 2 decades ago. A place where socialism and communism could never take hold, but it did.
With Marxist ideologies like critical race theory trying to take root in America, Florida Congresswoman Maria Salazar, whose parents also fled communist Cuba, had this to say.
We need a free market economy, we need liberty, we need democracy. We don't need anything else. The system has worked for 300 years. Let's just better it. Let's don't change it. It's not revolution, it's evolution of the system.
For most Americans who have never experienced true communism, it's hard to imagine what it's really like, and it's also hard to recognize as it starts to take hold.
And one of the things that a lot of us keep talking about is we've seen this before, right? I mean, look, socialism takes hold in places where people think it can't happen here.
This was an opportunity for several members of Congress to remind us of the horrors of socialism and communism, and that if the wrong policies are accepted, it can take root anywhere. Steve Lance, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
As the world continues to struggle with the CCP virus, an expert warns that China is using the access to vaccines to influence Latin America, which may harm the region as well as U.S. interest in the region.
During a Congressional Commission's hearing on China in Latin America and the Caribbean, Professor Evan Ellis warned that the Chinese regime is seeking its geopolitical interests through vaccine access.
China has used vaccine access to induce Brazil and the Dominican Republic to reverse prior commitments to exclude Huawei from its 5G networks. In Paraguay, China attempted to persuade the Abdo Benitez government to abandon Taiwan for a vaccine. And now in Honduras, President Juan Orlando Hernandez now promises to open a trade office in mainland China in order to get vaccines.
China has made Latin America and the Caribbean a particular focus of expanding its influence in recent years. The pandemic seems to be giving China a new opportunity. Ellis said it's very likely that Western companies, including those from Europe, will sell their businesses in the region, giving China the chance to further expand.
It will be absolutely critical that the U.S. plays a central role in cooperation with partner nations in ensuring the region's sustainable economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is crucial not only for the region's economic, social, and political stability, but also in pursuit of hemispheric security and democracy.
China is the number 2 largest trading partner of Latin America, and 19 governments across the region have joined Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. But plenty of such Chinese-backed infrastructure projects have left host countries with regrets. China is also expanding its military presence in the region and selling its state-led authoritarian model.
In other parts of the region, China exports its smart city initiatives, which integrates facial recognition technology with traditional surveillance equipment. Argentina and Ecuador have been recipients of such technology transfers in the past.
Recently, Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke at the annual Washington Conference on the Americas. He promised to stand with U.S. partners in the hemisphere to reject Beijing's coercive economic practices.
President Biden is set to meet with South Korea on Friday. It's Biden's second in-person meeting with a foreign head of state. NTD's Christina Kim previews some of the topics on the table.
South Korea's President Moon Jae-in is in America for his meeting with President Biden set for Friday afternoon. To kick off his trip, Moon laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery and met with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other leaders of the chamber.
We expect that North Korea will be a central topic of the discussion, of course, tomorrow, but they also will discuss climate. They will also discuss economic partnership. They will also discuss China.
Moon is expected to ask to tap into the U.S. vaccine supply or receive some support. That's because Korea struggled getting vaccines. Currently, they only have AstraZeneca and a limited amount of Pfizer vaccines. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. will share their supply with the world and will look at some criteria before making a decision. The summit is also expected to address the global semiconductor shortage. Biden may push for Korean companies like SK or Samsung, which have the technology to make semiconductors, to build factories in the U.S. The heads of these companies and several others are also in the U.S. during Moon's visit. On Saturday, Moon plans to visit the factory of South Korean battery maker SK Innovation in Atlanta. Moon is in his last year of his presidency. High on his priority list is to restore dialogue between North and South Korea and to work with the U.S. to achieve lasting peace in the region. But the Biden administration has signaled they're not looking to bargain with North Korea, especially when it comes to denuclearization.
Our policy will not focus on achieving a grand bargain, nor will it rely on strategic patience.
While Moon has spoken frequently about unification, he doesn't want to unify through absorption, the way East and West Germany were brought together. It's also unclear if South Korea will join the Quad to combat China's influence. Both countries have indicated the U.S.-Korea alliance is solid and valued. Christina Kim, NTD News.
The Biden administration is closing 2 ICE detention centers. The move comes after the centers came under scrutiny for reportedly having poor conditions and a lack of medical care. DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas announced ICE will stop detaining immigrants at a center in Bristol County, Massachusetts, and one in Irwin County, Georgia. CNN reports that officials there allegedly performed unnecessary hysterectomies and excessive force against detainees. Progressives have pushed to have the centers closed in an effort to end what some call the detention machine. That's while the RNC research group warns Biden is reportedly attempting to block ICE from enforcing immigration law. They cite record low deportations and allege Biden's pick to head ICE has made anti-ICE statements. As of last week, ICE had over 20,000 immigrants in detention. That's up nearly 5,000 since Biden took office. And Pennsylvania became one of the few states in the U.S. to cut back on their governor's emergency powers. The decision could drastically change the way disasters are managed in the future. NTD's Don Tran reports.
People in Pennsylvania voted in favor of two constitutional amendments. The First Amendment allows the state's General Assembly to pass a resolution to expand or terminate an emergency order from the governor. The second one limits a governor's emergency order to 21 days, unless the Legislative Committee votes on a joint resolution to extend the emergency order. Pennsylvania's House Speaker Brian Cutler said he's glad people made their voices heard.
But ultimately, our Constitution is clear. The people are the ones who are sovereign and give government the power. And I think we saw that result yesterday on the elections.
Over 2 million people voted on the two amendments, and more than 120,000 votes were cast in their favor. Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Wolf was criticized for his emergency orders. Some of them include sending kids home from school and shutting down too many businesses. For example, he allowed coal power plants to stay open, but closed coal mines, which led to power plants running out of resources.
Not having that input from the legislators and from the citizens, I think, severely impacted the early management of the pandemic. And so now I think going forward, we'll have that voice in the room on behalf of the people.
The amendments cannot take effect until the state certifies the election result, which could take until early June. Meanwhile, Governor Wolf signed a renewal of the state's disaster order related to the virus pandemic. Don Tran, NTD News.
Metropolitan Oregon and rural Oregon are worlds apart, and thousands of Oregonians are hoping to get a state boundary line drawn between them. They're not trying to create a new state, but to join their conservative neighbor, Idaho. And the movement is growing. Here's the details.
5 rural Oregon counties just voted to leave the state and become part of Idaho, one of the most conservative states in the nation. They joined 2 other counties that voted for the move last year. Growing support for the movement comes as thousands of rural Oregonians feel that their values aren't being represented.
Rural Oregon and urban Oregon are distinctly different in values.
Mike McCarter is the president of Move Oregon's Border, the group behind the movement. While cities like Portland embrace progressive policies and violent riots have become the norm, McCarter says rural communities simply want to preserve their traditional way of life.
Rural Oregon is a traditional value area where people are believing in faith, family, freedom. They're attached to their communities, they're attached to their land. But yet when situations in the legislature pass laws to deal with urban Oregon, it affects us here. And so we feel that we're better aligned with the rural communities and the traditional values of Idaho.
The Portland metro area is home to 47% of Oregon's voters, but covers less than 4% of the state's landmass. Big city voters overwhelmingly support progressive policies which raise taxes, increase government regulation, and impact the education system across the state. And it's not only Oregon that's battling with the urban-rural divide. The divide's been growing across America for decades, and the contrast is becoming increasingly stark. A map of the 2020 presidential election is a good illustration. With the exception of a few states, a majority of U.S. counties voted red, while most of the country's big cities voted blue.
I'm talking to people across the United States who are dealing with similar issues that we're dealing with here in Oregon. And it is a clash between urban and rural. We try not to think about it on a political line. It's more of a traditional value line that people who live in rural areas have a different set of standards and values that their life is surrounded with.
The bid to move the state's lines is seen as a long shot, since it would require a formal vote in the Democratic-controlled Oregon legislature, and the U.S. Congress needs to ratify it. But McCarter is optimistic because he says it's actually a win-win for both urban and rural Oregon. For now, the movement's just seeking to get the process started. McCarter says they expect 4 or 5 states to make the vote in the next election.
Up next, New York State is following the CDC guidelines and saying goodbye to the mask mandate. Some New Yorkers say good riddance to their masks by burning them. And we visit a Sculptor studio in New Jersey to discuss the value of art and how it can unify and uplift people. That and more on NTD News. New York State is ditching the mask mandate, at least for vaccinated people. Some are celebrating in a special way. NTD's Arian Pazdar shows us the mask burnings on the streets of Manhattan.
Yes, you heard that right. People have been burning masks in Midtown Manhattan, at least a few of them. Republican mayoral candidate Curtis Sliwa initiated the idea in order to celebrate the end of the mask mandate. He said it's hard to believe that masks were ever as helpful as some officials said they were.
When they didn't have enough masks for hospital personnel, for the doctors, the nurses, the orderlies, they said you don't need a mask. And they admitted that, including the Surgeon General. They lied to us. So why would I trust them anything they say thereafter? They admitted they lied once, and then Fauci's walking around with 2 masks on.
To make the whole event more festive, the Tramps performed their cult song Disco Inferno.
Oh, they did amazing. The Tramps it brings back childhood memories. And it was the perfect song as to what's going on today. Burn the mask.
From the beginning, when I was running, it was impossible to run and wear a mask. So I would sneak a little bit on the street.
It looks like the people here, not only the organizers but also the spectators, had already burned their masks mentally a few months ago. They only waited for the day to finally burn them publicly and tell the world it's time to breathe again. I'm Arian Pazdar, NTD News, New York.
Governors are looking to ramp up those vaccinations so much that they're willing to put you in line for millions of dollars, if you're lucky. New York set up their lottery today. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more.
Would you get a shot for $5 million? New York's Governor Cuomo seems to think so.
Vax and Scratch. How do you like that name? Vax and Scratch.
He's also not the first governor to offer cash for shots. Maryland and Ohio also gave it a go. In New York, participants will get a lottery ticket after getting vaccinated at one of 10 mass vaccination sites next week. State data says a little over 40% of New Yorkers are fully vaccinated, but less and less are getting in line.
Troubling news, the number of vaccinations are slowing, and they're slowing dramatically. We have a 43% decline in the number of people coming in for vaccinations.
Cuomo says this is because people who wanted to get the shot already got it, and that the rest who are willing may need incentives, like millions of dollars. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
And up next, a privately owned radio station in Santa Cruz, California, broadcasts a weekly show warning of the dangers of communism.
Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Kids will be kids, which just goes to say kids will be curious. They get into everything. If there's a loaded firearm in the house, they could get their hands on that too. Keeping firearms locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition in a place inaccessible to kids can help keep your loved ones safe from family fire. Safe gun storage saves lives.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate copays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month.
I called to get dental, transportation, meals, and the Give Back benefit.
With this virus situation, I called to get everything I'm entitled to. I couldn't believe I was missing out on so many benefits.
With the uncertainty of the virus, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare coverage helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-764-1930. That's 1-800-764-1930 now.
More than $220 million worth of cocaine won't make it to U.S. streets, and it's all thanks to the Coast Guard. The cocaine was offloaded in San Diego Wednesday after it was seized by the Coast Guard in the eastern Pacific Ocean. The Coast Guard intercepted 4 different vessels smuggling the drugs at different times off the coasts of Mexico, Central America, and South America. The drugs weigh more than 11,000 pounds. They were confiscated during operations in April and May. And on the sunny Pacific shore of California, a privately owned radio station broadcasts a weekly show warning of the dangers of communism. The show particularly singles out the CCP, or Chinese Communist Party. We hear more from NTD's David Lamb.
People come to Santa Cruz to enjoy the ocean and sunshine. However, several Americans living here are working hard to deliver their message about the other side of the ocean.
He just made one offhand comment about Xi Jinping, and all of a sudden, he's in the process of losing everything.
It's a place full of lies. You know, you could say that same statement about every country in the world if you want.
KSCO is locally owned and operated. The president took ownership of the station in 1991. The station's broadband reaches a third of California's real estate and is accessible online. And the station has over 30 programs. They started a new program in September called China Uber Alice.
The purpose of our program is to let people know that communism, and Chinese communism in particular, is not a friend to the United States.
The hosts talk about U.S. and China relations as well as human rights abuses of Chinese citizens.
And I have no bones saying that. And I think a lot of other people are afraid to say that. Okay. I'm not afraid to say it. I think the CCP is evil. Evil.
Brainwash.
I understand why the Chinese government reacted the way it did.
I'm talking about it's a long term. Even I left China.
The China Uber Alice program usually starts with an anecdote from Amy Howe, who spent 10 years imprisoned in a CCP labor camp. She says if they don't talk about what China was like before the Cultural Revolution, nobody will know the damage the CCP has inflicted.
The next generation, they don't even know about. So I think I wanted to talk about those stories. I just don't want to bury it forever, you know.
Howe said they received phone calls from listeners as far as Australia and New Zealand.
Even you get a free country, sometimes I have a nightmare. I wake up and say, so glad I look everywhere. Oh, this is America, you know.
1949.
That's correct.
Right. And that mind control has been in effect since 1949.
The show title, China Uber Alice, is a reference to a Nazi slogan.
The Nazi anthem, which was Deutschland über alles, which meant Germany over all. The idea that the Chinese Communist Party would like to see itself as being the dominant power in the world, it would be China over all, essentially.
China has more naval ships than the United States Navy now, right? So that's a threat.
The station's audience have spoken positively to the hosts for their show.
They've been saying that they like the idea that we're focusing on what China is up to around the world.
Listeners can tune in live every Thursday afternoon, 2 to 4 Pacific time, or anytime on their website. Reporting in Santa Cruz, David Lamb, NTD News.
Art can act as a universal language and bring people together. But how can an artist achieve this goal? NTD's Christina Kim visits a studio in New Jersey to find out how one figurative sculptor does this.
This 25-foot bronze sculpture is called the Oracle, and it'll be here on display at the Rockefeller Center until June 29th. According to the artist, the installation is based on mythology, narrative, and mystery. But it's receiving mixed feedback online, with some saying there are better representations of African culture and art. We speak to a classical figurative sculptor for his insight. Sabin Howard and his team work at a studio in New Jersey. He's a classical figurative sculptor with more than 45,000 hours of experience. He says the Oracle isn't exactly the same as his type of art, but he's happy to see a figurative piece. He believes it'll spark dialogue about how art fits into a public space.
And I think that that is the beginning of a new road that we can all begin to have a conversation about.
Howard is currently working on a 58-foot-long World War I memorial. It tells a hero's journey before, during, and after the war, highlighting the emotions and the humanity of the experience. It's set to be revealed in Washington, D.C. on Memorial Day weekend 2024. We spoke about his philosophy on art, beauty, and the sacred. He described the Earth. When you look from afar, it looks like one single unit. But when you zoom in closer, you see it's composed of many complex pieces. The process repeats itself all the way down to the microscopic level. Depicting this structure through art shows how humans and the world are interconnected. That is sacred and unifying.
That idea is the concept of the sacred, and that idea itself is the concept of beauty. Those two elements elevate us as human beings and remind us of what we really are and what we can be.
Howard's art focuses on visual depth, proportions, anatomy, structure, and design. He says his artistic education allows him to identify and break down these elements and put them together in a rich way. This way, his work can touch something below the surface and move the viewer from the mundane to the sacred. It makes the piece interesting, even for people who aren't into art.
And that's something that has been lost in the last 100 years. The art has deviated from the visual and gone more towards the conceptual in the book that you read about that art. It needs to return back to the visual, because visual art is first and foremost visual.
Howard is a traditional artist, but his art lives in the modern day. He references live models while he sculpts, which he believes will elicit a fresh, visceral response from viewers. Howard says if humanity looks at the world in a more holistic, less divisive way, we would have more room for unity, creativity, and productivity. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Wildlife experts in Washington state continue their fight against an invasive insect species. The local government is also making moves to contain the spread. One expert gave NTD in-depth details on these unwelcome guests.
The Washington State Department of Agriculture met on May 11th to discuss means of controlling an invasive hornet species. Asian giant hornets were first spotted near the Canadian border in 2019. Since then, wildlife experts have worked to contain the hornets, including Washington State University entomology professor Timothy Lawrence.
I'm fairly optimistic that now that we have captured a few and we are able to have biochemists working on synthesizing the pheromone and developing better lures to attract them and be able to track them back to their nest, we can put enough pressure on the species to eradicate it.
The experts' work did not come easily, as Lawrence told NTD in their initial efforts to catch an individual hornet.
This is going to be like finding a needle in a haystack, and he said, no, it's worse than that. It's finding a straw-colored needle in a haystack.
Lawrence said these hornets may have come to North America by hitching a ride on imported cars. They face no natural competition in the region.
Anytime you bring in any animal from a different environment and there are no natural predators, there are no natural enemies of that particular species, and the local flora and fauna may not have a defense mechanism against them. And that's certainly the case with the Asian giant hornet.
A small group of these hornets can wipe out an entire honeybee colony in a matter of hours. But Lawrence says that is not the main concern.
The amount of venom that they have is 7 times the amount of venom that a honeybee. So the Asian giant hornet is able to repeatedly sting an individual and deliver the full volume of venom. Well, it can be fatal.
Lawrence says the hornets are generally only aggressive towards humans if their nests are disturbed. Nonetheless, the Washington Department of Agriculture is considering quarantining all hornet species in the state. Measures are proposed to be adopted on May 18th and would come into effect 1 month later.
Coming up, new subway cars in Massachusetts malfunction 4 times in less than 2 years. One key detail, all of the problem cars were assembled by a Chinese state-owned company. And Chinese authorities further crack down on cryptocurrencies. A Chinese province is now setting up a hotline for residents to report suspected cryptocurrency mining. That and more on NTD News. Chinese-made subway cars in the greater Boston area are malfunctioning for the 4th time in less than 2 years. A train derailed in March while some 100 passengers were on board, and authorities identified a malfunction following an investigation. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
Authorities in Massachusetts identified a malfunction in the new Chinese-made subway cars earlier this month. That's the 4th time they malfunctioned since they first went into service less than 2 years ago. Chinese state-owned company CRRC assembled Massachusetts' new Red Line and Orange Line cars. The Chinese company will deliver over 400 train cars to Massachusetts over the next few years. This most recent malfunction first started about 2 months ago. Local transportation authorities had to pull all new trains from service after an Orange Line train derailed. About 100 passengers were on board, but fortunately, no one was injured. The trains will remain out of service before engineers find out the root cause and come up with a solution. These Chinese-made trains had 3 other malfunction accidents since they first went into service in August of 2019. Authorities had to pull them from service every time. In September 2019, a door on an Orange Line car suddenly opened while the train was in motion. 2 months later, a new train derailed while it ran back to the maintenance facility. Then in March 2020, a fault with the bolsters again put the new trains temporarily out of service. In May 2019, U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer asked the federal government to investigate if Chinese-made train cars could pose a threat to national security. Massachusetts state lawmaker Sean Dooley suggested that American cities should stay away from the Chinese state-owned manufacturer. He said no one is under the delusion that Communist China is our ally. They have made no secret of their plans for a one China economy. Dooley went on to say, putting our citizens at risk for a few dollars, especially from a hostile foreign government, is mind-blowing. An island nation in the South Pacific will cancel a China-backed project. The Chinese regime was planning to build a wharf there. A local media said the project was in the final stages of negotiation with Beijing, but the island nation's incoming prime minister calls the project excessive. That's because the country already owes Beijing huge debts. The new leader might be able to form a government as early as Friday. Communist China is the single largest creditor in Samoa. The $160 million Chinese loan accounts for about 40% of Samoa's external debt. The U.S. and its allies have criticized the Chinese regime for extending infrastructure loans to developing countries. Beijing could potentially turn facilities such as ports into military assets. That would pose a challenge to the U.S. Navy. Uniqlo is the latest brand in trouble over cotton from China's Xinjiang region. Customs documents show that the U.S. blocked imports of some shirts back in January. That was over concerns it violated a ban on cotton products from Xinjiang, where there's a growing evidence of forced labor. A document shows that one shipment was impounded at the port of Los Angeles in January. Uniqlo's parent company protested the move, but it didn't work. Fast Retailing said it was disappointed by the U.S. Customs ruling.
A Chinese province is asking its residents to blow the whistle on anyone they know who is mining cryptocurrency. It's the latest way the Chinese regime is cracking down on cryptos. NTD's Patrick Hayden has more.
A Chinese province is asking residents to inform on people they suspect are mining cryptocurrency. Inner Mongolia says the crackdown is to reduce energy consumption, as crypto mining requires a considerable amount of electricity. The province has set up a telephone hotline so residents can report any suspected mining. The Inner Mongolia Development and Reform Commission says they're going to comprehensively clean up and shut down these operations. Markets Insider reports the Commission is also targeting companies that are posing as data centers. These businesses get tax breaks, property discounts and cheaper electricity, all of which assists mining. These actions coincide with a growing crackdown in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies across the whole country. Cointelegraph reports that from September 2019 to April 2020, the province was a global hub for crypto mining, accounting for nearly 8% of global Bitcoin mining. And Chinese miners account for the vast majority of Bitcoins mined globally. This week, China's central bank said they are not real currencies. The regime wants to promote its digital yuan, which it controls. Following the announcement, Bitcoin slumped as much as 30%. The Chinese regime limits the amount of money individuals can send abroad, so cryptocurrencies are one way Chinese citizens can get around these rules. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Coming up, a French general is inspired by former President Trump and calls on the French people to defend patriotism. And the migrant crisis between Spain and Morocco continues to escalate after 8,000 migrants arrived in the Spanish port city of Ceuta. Spain's defense minister is calling the surge a form of blackmail. That and more on NTD News.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
A retired French general is praising former President Trump's leadership, saying Trump has set an example he would follow himself, and that Trump's achievements as president will be remembered in history. NTD's France correspondent David Vives met with the general.
In an interview with NTD on Tuesday, retired French General Antoine Martinez said he's looking forward to the return of former President Trump.
It seems like they were all wrong to say Donald Trump did not make history and that people would soon forget him. In my opinion, he's now breaking new ground for the Republican Party. Who knows what will happen in 4 years?
Over 120 retired U.S. generals and admirals criticized the new administration's socialist policies in an open letter last week. They also raised concerns over the integrity of the 2020 general elections. Their letter came out after retired French generals also put out an open letter addressing their government. 20 retired generals in France wrote in late April that French government leaders should try to get their honor back and defend patriotism. They went on to say that France is facing a mortal threat due to gang wars and a spike in violence across the country. Martinez says although the two letters are different in content, they both reflect military leaders' concerns with their respective country.
Maybe we inspired them. I guess these generals must have read our letter. They are very different though. Our letter is a warning and a wake-up call.
The general says the leftist agenda is challenging not only France's, but also other Western countries' will to defend their core values and their identities.
There is a financial oligarchy that is in power, not just in France, but also in other countries. It's something that follows the Davos Group ideas, a Davocracy. This oligarchy's objective is to remove all borders and create what they call the new man, destroy the connection existing between people and people's connection with their own history.
Martinez adds that he would run for president in France as a way to deliver his message on patriotism. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Spain's defense minister has implied that Morocco allowed thousands of migrants to enter the Spanish port city of Ceuta as a form of blackmail. That's after 8,000 migrants arrived this week. Morocco has territorial claims over the Spanish enclave.
Spain accused Morocco of blackmail on Thursday over its passivity in the face of a migrant surge into its enclave of Ceuta. The rush began on Monday when Morocco appeared to loosen border controls. Defense Minister Margarita Robles said Morocco had endangered lives by creating the conditions for thousands of migrants to enter. She said, "We will not accept any blackmail, no matter how small, or any questioning of our territorial integrity." Morocco has a territorial claim over Ceuta and Spain's other North African enclave, Melilla. Many see the move as retaliation for Spain's hosting of an independence leader. Brahim Ghali's Polisario Front is fighting for Western Sahara to be independent from Morocco. The Spanish government, however, has sought to keep the two issues separate. But one Moroccan minister suggested they were connected. He said on social media that Morocco had the right to lean back in response to such a reckless act. The Spanish opposition has strongly criticised Spain's government over the situation. The leader of opposition party Vox visited Ceuta on Wednesday.
We are facing a real invasion of our national territory, an invasion directed and planned by a neighbouring country, an invasion that has brought thousands, mostly male at conscription age, to our country. Also many youngsters, minors who have been used as human bulldozers by Morocco.
This week, Spain detained as many as 8,000 migrants who swam into Ceuta or climbed over fences. It sent a majority of them back to Morocco. Spain is struggling to handle the 1,500 unaccompanied minors who can't be returned by law until their relatives can be found. Last year, about 2,000 migrants crossed into Ceuta and Melilla. Wednesday saw hundreds of migrants clash with Moroccan police on the other side of the border. Ceuta authorities say that no migrants crossed overnight into the city. This after Moroccan security forces in the neighbouring North African kingdom tightened the border. On Thursday morning, both sides of the border in Ceuta were mostly quiet and the beach deserted. Spanish troops patrolled on their side.
On Wednesday, European Union countries agreed to ease pandemic travel restrictions on non-EU visitors. That's ahead of the summer tourist season, which could open the door for British and vaccinated American vacationers.
European countries have now agreed to ease COVID travel restrictions for visitors, meaning the summer tourist season could be open to all Britons and also vaccinated Americans. They are expected to set a new list this week or early next week. Based on data from the European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, Britain and a number of other countries would meet the new criteria. The United States would not, but Americans with proof of vaccination would be welcomed. That's because under the plan, EU countries that waive test or quarantine requirements for vaccinated EU tourists are encouraged to do the same for vaccinated non-EU holidaymakers. It may not be a universal opening, however. Individual countries can and will still be able to choose to demand a negative COVID-19 test or a period of quarantine.
Coming up, a Thai entrepreneur finds a creative use for banana leaves, helping his community through hard times. And a zoo in Australia is welcoming a newly hatched fuzzy friend, but giving it a hug might not be the best choice. That and more on NTD News. When you think luxury, you may not think banana leaves. But that's not stopping this designer in Thailand. Many farmers had it rough during the pandemic, and so he found a creative way to help his community.
A Thai designer is working together with the banana farmers in his community to make luxury handbags. They bring their knowledge of planting, and he brings his blueprints for handbags, hats, boxes, notebook covers, and other accessories. As different as each item is, they have one thing in common. They're made out of banana leaves. Banana leaf fibers, to be exact. He says the process starts by extracting the fibers from the leaves and drying them out in the sun to remove moisture that causes molds. They are then ironed with mulberry papers before being shaped into designed products. Each piece of work is given precise attention and inspiration that are in the community's identity. During the pandemic, many Thai workers lost their jobs. The 33-year-old entrepreneur knew he needed to up his game. He says, "We shifted into luxury items, and they've been well received as they are environmentally friendly too." His line of handbags called Tanny is available on online stores and outlets around Thailand. The designer is teaching the farmers how to make the bags. The revenue from the bags is returned to the community to help their workers through the pandemic.
While Puggle might sound like a juggling pug circus act, it's actually what you call a baby platypus or echidna. Like this rare short-beaked echidna. The Puggle is one of the newest additions to Sydney's Taronga Zoo's echidna breeding program. Only hatched 7 months ago, it's the 10th Puggle born at the zoo. According to the Australian Zoo, short-beaked echidnas start out their lives blind and hairless. They live in their mother's pouch until they become too prickly and mom kicks them out. That was a few months ago for this echidna. Taronga Zoo says they don't know if it's a boy or a girl yet. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.